All right, good evening. My name is Rachel Wimbley, and when I was just 17 years old, I made the active choice to leave home and serve in the United States Army. For 6 years, in both garrison and combat environments, I served alongside other service members who each had their own unique motivation to serve their country. Selective service is a system that requires all males ages 18 to 26 to register for a potential draft when they apply for a driver's license. Moreover, it's been argued now that since women are able to serve in all military roles, including the infantry, that they too should be required to register for the selective service. Some may argue that selective service is a system of the patriarchy. It discriminates against women. That even though women have proven their ability to effectively serve in combat roles, this outdated ideology is no longer appropriate in modern society that values gender equality. They argue that the patriarchy hurts everyone, both men and women, and it fosters resentment between the sexes. However, I believe that the selective service should not include women or men. I believe it should be abolished altogether. Take into consideration that is the looming uncertainty that is the next significant conflict. It may occur in my lifetime, your son, your daughter, your neighbor could be a victim of the draft. With international tensions on the rise, it's crucial to revisit our selective service system and consider whether it's a fair and necessary tool for conscription. The first argument I make against selective service is that it is a basic violation of natural law. Involuntary service goes against the principles of freedom and autonomy that the United States was built upon. Our nation was founded on the idea that individuals should have the right to make choices about their own lives, including whether or not to serve in the military. The 2022 Rasmussen National Report, taken via telephone and online survey, finds that only 23% of American adults think the United States should have a military draft. 56% see no need for a draft, and only 17% are not sure. Bayard Rustin once said, "War is wrong. Conscription for war is inconsistent with freedom of conscience, which is not merely the right to believe, but to act on the degree of truth that one receives, to follow a vocation which is God-inspired and God-directed." Involuntary service destroys the credibility of the United States to the American people. It makes it difficult for service members to fight for a country that does not recognize each citizen's natural freedoms. Additionally, the draft would disproportionately affect the poor in our society. Those with wealth would be able to either buy their way out of service or have easier access to medical professionals who can diagnose them with disqualifying conditions. They can better afford to leave their families or go to college to avoid service. This creates an unjust system where the burden of military service falls heavily on the less privileged members of society. Lastly, selective service is a generally outdated system. That's just not useful in modern warfare. Warfare has changed significantly as technology is advanced. We're moving from counterinsurgency to near-peer or peer-to-peer combat, where technically proficient individuals are crucial. These individuals need to be highly motivated, and involuntary service doesn't foster that motivation from within oneself. After the 9/11 attacks, Americans voluntarily joined the military in greater numbers for the war on terrorism. They did so out of a sense of valor and a desire to defend their country, and not because they were forced to. The United States has remained a military powerhouse with an all-volunteer army, proving that we don't need a draft to maintain our strength. Jacob Weinberg stated, "Because conscription appeals to essentially no one, the United States has lived with an all-volunteer force since the end of the Vietnam War." Before I conclude, let's take some time to reflect on the experience of Vietnam veterans. Today, we still have many living Vietnam vets that were originally drafted into service. In fact, one is my neighbor. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial Service states that 2/3 of the United States military who served in the Vietnam War, and more than half of the names on the wall, volunteered for duty, while the other 1/3 were drafted, primarily into the Army. It's essential to understand that the general consensus amongst these veterans is that the Vietnam and its conscription was a dark and tumultuous time in American history. Victims of compulsory service do not feel a sense of pride or valor. Instead, Instead, they feel betrayed by their country. They were met with insults. Their families were torn apart. They saw their friends die, and tomatoes were thrown at them upon returning home. They were called baby killers, all in response to a choice that was made for them and not by them. This painful chapter in American history serves as a haunting reminder of the consequences of compulsory service. In the light of experience of these veterans, considering the fundamental principles of freedom, equality, choice that our nation holds dear, it's clear that selective service should be abolished. We shouldn't repeat these mistakes of our past and instead uphold the values that make our nation great. Abolishing selective service is a step towards recognizing and respecting the individual rights and choices of all Americans. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Would you be in favor of the draft if you had the drafted people, instead of going to war, they remotely control mechanized, non-gendered robots to go to war for them in a centralized location, so they're out of dangerous way?
Would I support the draft if we use remotely operated vehicles, basically, and robots to do all the dirty work for us while we're in the safety of our safety of being stateside? No, I would not, because it goes against the freedom and liberty of whether or not you want to serve in the military, regardless of whether you're actually in the line of danger or not.
I see.
Thanks. Here, let me show my audience. Sarah.